I'm Tom Hausman. I live here in Yankton, but the family's owned some pasture just north of Bonesteel for some time. And just whatever the term was here, Rod, generational something or other, I thought that's what it's about. It's kind of like my eyesight is suffering because of generations, and my waistline and my forehead's turned into a 5-head, so that's all a generational effect, I guess. When the same thing has happened with the pasture, and this is a picture taken back in 1955. A little hard to see the outline of the pasture here, but you can see these ridges, relatively free of any kind of tree growth. But I'd like you to especially notice some of these little finger ridges that come off of the main ridges that run down there. And we'll see in time here, this is, I guess the geese see it twice a year and probably noticed it, but Dad and I didn't for a long time. But there was a point somewhere in there, maybe, I don't know, when I was in high school, and I remember Dad saying, boy, the cedar trees are just really getting thick. But nothing was done about it. And then maybe, I don't know, the next summer it was the same story. Boy, the cedar trees are really getting thick, and I'd agree, and then we'd just keep on going. And that's all it was to it. And I'm wondering if it's not happening in more places. So this is 85, and you can see quite a difference there in where some of these little finger ridges, now it's still a little bit, you can still drive along here, but some of those ridges are starting to fill in a little bit. If we go back, notice, for instance, this ridge right here that extends out. And what's happened to it. Here it is right here. You can start to see it covering in a little bit. Some of this other stuff here is sumac that's covering that. But the ridges are starting to fill in a little bit in 85. Here's 04. Now take that same ridge that I was pointing at a little bit ago. Look at how many more trees are on that. It's just starting to come in all along. Some of these finger ridges along here, you almost can't even get down them. Certainly not drive down them. But they're pretty steep anyway, but just not near what they were. This is another spot right here that at one time, my dad and his brothers farmed that. In fact, there's still some of the old ridges, old fence line kind of ridges in the ground there. So here's 8, just 4 years later. Notice again this ridge up here that I was pointing out and how that's covered in. And some of these along in here, same story, just getting tougher and tougher. This spot right here, I carry a chainsaw with me all the time. Almost have to have a chainsaw along to drive a pickup through there. Once or twice there'd be some branches grow in or whatever it was. But a chainsaw is kind of about as handy as a 4x4 or anything else anymore out here. Here's 12. Now notice how thin that spot is. This one here is pretty well covered. Some of these along here almost can't see the ridge at all. You can relate to that, Floyd? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So that spot where Dad farmed, well, it was more than 50 years ago, but that's getting pretty well covered. Some of these other ridges on the other side too they're filling in. It's just not quite as dramatic as the view here. Now we get to 14, and we're just still got some of these same issues. Here's 18. There's where we've sheared. You can see a lot of these ridges now, and they're not completed yet. But there were so many trees in there that the guys would shear, and the plan was to cut off the ridges until it got too steep, and then tuck the last trees down in against the trees that were still in the real steep areas, and that would be our fuel to burn those that were still standing. Well, we had so many trees in there that we had to start making piles. They did, I didn't. And we had, I think it was, Dave, 43 or 45 piles of trees that were anywhere from 10 to maybe 15 feet high and sometimes 20 or 30 feet across. 43 of those piles, in addition to all of the tuck trees. So you can see, though, that area where Dad farmed, right here, that's been cleared off. Again, lots of trees, just lots. It was getting almost impassable. So the earlier Grimm photo or video when they said, would handle 10 cows before, only handle 3 now. Yeah, people would rent the pasture, but they didn't run many cows out there. As a result of that last video there, and you guys can come up and look at this stuff here if you want, with Dave Steffen's help, we created a part of the burn plan, the prescription that Sarah talked about in that video. And this is the level of planning that we put into that, partially because it was so dense. There were so many piles, so many, some of the tuck trees were really close to pile trees, and we really weren't sure what was going to happen with even though we were within the parameters of the prescription, what was going to happen when some of these things would start burning, where were the embers going to go, and what all might catch on fire faster than we'd planned on. So Dave put a lot of work into this thing and trying to figure out just how to go about this, but these are the results of the shearing and then the planning before we burned. So you can see our black lines here to hopefully control the thing. Dave put in sequential burns. First we'd burn this area and then here. Our wind is from the southeast, so wind's burning this way, and how we would burn these two out, and then any fire down here would burn into those areas. All of the tuck trees that followed those tree lines are indicated by the white lines here on this plan, just to help us as we try to describe this to other people before the burn, on the day of the burn, just how tight this might be and what danger there could be involved in it. So then we have, on this map, then we got the black lines, the sequential burns, and finally the tuck lines to help illustrate it to people in the planning process. The other thing that we did was create and map out all of the escape routes in that pasture. It's about 300 acres. But the prescription is to help predict what could happen and how best to start the fire, but also control the fire. But somewhere along the line, you got to, in my opinion, you got to be a little bit more than just a little bit cautious and say, what happens if things go wrong? And people have got to have a chance to get out of some of those tight spots. Again, because some of those finger ridges were so narrow, and you would light all of these tucked trees going downhill. What happens if they get down there and the fire is so tight they just can't get out of it? So put a lot of time in that. Dave put a lot of time in that, a lot of thought. So that was kind of my story. And any questions on that right now? Anyone? Okay. We got a couple more slides from Doug Feltman. This is looking off of his deck or his window or porch from his house up in Brule County. And if you can see that, it's 1981, and look at the landscape past these trees here in the foreground, and look what that ridge is like now. 1981, so here's 1988, so just 7 years later, you can start to see how that thing's starting to fill in. All right, here's 94. I don't know, that's snow on the ground. I take it by them wearing jackets, but you can see that the dark shaded areas out there, that's all cedar trees coming in. Over 13 years, we can see it. And there's 2008. Same view on all four of those pictures. Pictures speak 1,000 words, huh? Okay. So how many of you can relate to that and say, yeah, I've got some spots that are just like that? Raise your hands if you would, please. Okay. Any? Yeah, got a few more. Okay. Maybe a third of you, something like that. All right. So time gets away, and as Rod pointed out, the growth just keeps on happening. And when I was in high school, if Dad said even if we had to go out there and cut them down with a chainsaw one at a time, it'd been worth it. But my cost in doing all of that, I've got it here, but I think it's about what I pay in taxes per acre right now. Over all of the costs that all the money I've spent on that with the equip help and everything else, it's about 1 year of taxes per acre. So if you look at it that way, we could have spent it 50 years ago, a little bit at a time, or now. So it's going to get away if we don't do something. And I'm certainly glad I did this. Very glad. Yes, sir.
So after you burned it back and got it to where it is now, what are you doing to hold it there?
Well, that's a good question. This kind of a thumb-like looking thing sticking up here is pretty well all gone now. We've sheared that out. So more shearing is being done. But then, yeah, there are a lot of cedar trees that will come in where we cut those off or sheared them off. So in another year or two, see, we burned this in May of 18. So another year or two, maybe 3, we'll come back in and do a grass burn. It'll hopefully catch those little little guys that are come along with
So
it.
you're just gonna prescribe burn it from now on?
Yeah.
On a schedule and,
Absolutely. So it's burning is a part of the management process. There's shearing and other means. I'm much more interested in doing a burn every few years now, just to keep all this the trees out, but also just to promote the health of the soil and everything else. Absolutely. Someone else? Question? Yes, sir.
How long after you did your burn were you able, before you had your grass coming back to you, to the point where you could start regrazing it?
How long after we burned was the grass coming back? Would we have been able to graze it? Am I accurate in that? Okay. Sean, help me out here if there's a recommended time lapse, but 100 days is an ideal time period through the warm months of the summer to let that come back. And we didn't graze that at all that summer, and we had, which grass is it that's big blue stem? That was up, over my head, or just about over my head when I'm on a four-wheeler. It comes back really fast. It's crazy. We burned our black lines in April, thinking we could burn later on in April or early May, and we didn't, and then we had a 20-inch snow. We weren't able to burn until the 15th of May, and those black lines were they were green lines. It was still a preventative or a measure, a barrier, but it didn't take long at all, not long. The other question that comes up sometimes on those steep ravines, what about erosion? And there is very little erosion on those steep hillsides. Just doesn't happen. I don't know what technically that is, but there's almost a crust gets formed there, and it just doesn't wash much at all. Okay. Somebody else? Yes, sir.
Did you get pretty complete consumption of your cedars? Did they all burn?
No. Our tuck trees had laid there from June in 17 until the May of 18, and that stuff burned really well. And we got some consumption of other trees, but not nearly what we would hope for. First of all, the wind wasn't in the right direction to get some of them. It burned away from them. But even those where it burned down into, we did well. I was happy with it, but it didn't get anywhere near all of them. I don't know if we ever will get all of them.